Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Canyon Conversation. Today, I am joined by Molly Cannon. Molly is the director and curator of the USU Museum of Anthropology, and Anna Cohen. And Anna is a research assistant in the anthropology department. Did I get both your titles right, Molly and Anna?
Yes. I'm a research assistant professor.
Research assistant professor. So Molly and Anna are here today to talk to us a little bit about the Water Heritage Project, which I know nothing about. So tell us a little bit about what the Water Heritage Project is.
Sure. So the Water Heritage Anthropological Project was initiated with a grant from the Bureau of Reclamation out of the Provo office. And with that set of funding, we are interested in documenting and then researching Utah's historic irrigation infrastructure. Our project is building from that and hoping to take a more broad look at what water heritage means to Utahns. And we're doing so in a mixed methods approach. So maybe I'll just let Anna share some of those methods that we're using with our research.
Yeah, please.
Sure. So Molly and I are both trained as archaeologists, which means that typically we work with materials. So whether it's excavating or surveying, walking across the landscape and mapping features or archaeological sites, whether they're ancient or more recent. And in this project, we integrate some of those techniques or methods by walking across the landscape and using remote sensing data, so data from afar. But we're also integrating other techniques like interviewing, which is the hallmark of cultural anthropology, who we sort of fall under the umbrella with at USU. We're also doing archival work at the USU Library, but also throughout the Mountain West. We're sort of integrating all of these different techniques to look at the evolution of water management. So there's the irrigation component of more recent times, the historic period, but we're also going back a little bit deeper in time in Utah, and that's where sort of the archaeology comes in a bit more.
Fascinating. So what are you discovering on that, I guess, archaeology side in the kind of pre-written history? Have you found anything interesting in this project?
Well, we unfortunately have not had the chance to do much of our field work components, but through our research, we've been able to compile work completed by others. And there are several different ancient systems that have been documented in southern Utah. I was able to work with Professor Emeritus Steve Sims here at Utah State University on an irrigation system as part of what's known as Pleasant Creek. And this was a system that dated prior to European settlement and the pioneers coming to Utah, but not as early as what some of Utah's earliest farmers, the Fremont. So sometime in that middle period. And as part of that project, I helped with some of the remote sensing and GIS mapping, as well as using geophysics to document what that irrigation system looked like.
That's fascinating. So you've mentioned some pieces of technology that you're using with this project, like the remote sensing. Can you kind of walk us through, like, what does that look like? How do you use that remote sensing technology?
I'm going to let Anna talk a little bit about the airborne, and then I can follow up with some of the geophysics equipment that I've used.
That would be great.
Well, so we actually have plans in this project to collect some additional airborne data, and the kind of technology that we're going to use to identify water features in Utah is called LIDAR, light detection and ranging. And this is used throughout the sciences to identify anything from differences in soil to landscape modification, things like that, to forest cover. In archaeology, it's really helpful to obviously see the landscape from above, but the LiDAR technology enables us to sort of penetrate through a tree canopy or shrubbery, which is common, of course, in different landscapes throughout Utah. And so what this technology will enable us to do is identify where people were modifying a landscape for irrigation systems, maybe making canals or modifying existing water systems for their own purposes. And so our hope is to collect that within the next year. With the pandemic, that has been tricky, even though it is remote. Mm-hmm. But that's one thing that really sort of adds to our multidisciplinary nature of this project, using this remote data and then also other sort of spatial data that that maybe Molly can talk about.
Great. So you're flying over using this LiDAR. It's able to kind of penetrate, as you said, through the shrubs and stuff to help you identify those areas that have been disturbed by humans in the past and kind of map that out. It's fascinating. All right, Molly, I'll let you talk about what you're using.
Yeah, so what's kind of nice about these nested technologies is once you've collected information from the air and you're ready to do some groundwork, we have a suite of instruments that we use, including ground penetrating radar and magnetometer surveys. And both of these are instruments that you survey on the ground with. In the case of the radar, it's almost like pushing a lawnmower back and forth across a site, and it's collecting information about things just below the surface, the ground surface, down to anywhere from maybe up to 2 meters, or if you have different instruments, you can go much, much deeper. The magnetometer looks, how do you describe it? Ours looks kind of like a giant laser gun that you might use, but it's a sensor. So it's a passive system where it's collecting information about disturbances and changes in magnetic signatures below the ground surface. And it images about 1 meter below the ground surface. So it's a good technology for those features that are near the surface. Both of them give you different kinds of information. And while we haven't had the chance to use them yet here in this project, I have, like I said, used them in the past, and they both worked great for imaging buried canals. And then the magnetometer did a fantastic job of imaging what happened with this water once the people moved it along. They essentially were moving it along a mountainside and then brought it to this field, and we could see how that water just naturally fanned out once they got it to that dispersal location. And so the magnetometer was a great instrument for imaging that, and I can show some of the pictures of that because it was a pretty neat finding.
Yeah.
The GPR, or the ground penetrating radar, probably would have done the same thing. It was just so heavily vegetated with sagebrush that it was a difficult instrument to use in that setting.
Yeah, it's just fascinating to me that this technology lets you see that, because obviously you could walk through probably a field today where maybe there was some of these irrigation systems and just have no idea, just walking across and looking with your eyes.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right, so what I'm showing first is this ground penetrating radar image. And what you can see is in this left side of this frame here. Are you able to see my cursor as I move it? I guess I'm not sure. Yes, okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we call a profile perspective. And a profile is taken as we walk from point A to point B in our survey. And so it's as if you were looking straight down in the ground, all the way down along that transect, which is an awkward thing to think about. But what it allows us to do is, I guess it would be kind of like if you took a layer cake
Mhm.
like ice cream cake. That's what I
Yeah.
can think of something that's layered like that, and you slice that cake in half and then opened it.
Mhm.
We would be looking at that whole slice of that cake going down.
The layers inside.
Yep. And so up here at the top is the ground surface. And then down here where it gets really kind of fuzzy, that's essentially where the radar is losing its attenuation. So the signal is sort of getting scattered and lost. And so this down here is not giving us much information, but it's right in this area where we're able to kind of see what's happening below the ground surface. And so in this particular slice, we are about 50 centimeters below the ground surface, and we can see these little, maybe you see lots of these wavy things, but I'm looking at this one in particular because that tells me there's something that's right below the ground surface there, somewhere in that 40 to 50 centimeters below the ground surface. And it has some kind of regular shape. And that is, once they excavated that, that was exactly where one of those canal channels was found. So we were able to show that the ground penetrating radar, and that's what we're seeing here, is if we sort of cut the top of the cake off
Yeah.
and look down at the whole round of the cake, that's what this image would be showing us. And we can kind of make out this sort of, if we connected these white dots here, that's that canal feature there.
Okay.
And while it was difficult to collect because of the vegetation, we were able to get a few of these transects in with the ground penetrating radar. And then this is an image now where each of these sort of large blocks are 20 meters by 20 meters. So this is a pretty substantial area. And this is the magnetometer data. And it only lets us see some things as if we cut that top of the cake off and we're looking straight down on it. And if we were off my map, now we're looking at magnetometer data. And these blocks here are 20 meters by 20 meters.
Okay.
So this is a much larger footprint than what we were able to look at with the ground penetrating radar. Just the nature of the survey, the instruments are easier to maneuver around and through vegetation. And if we were looking off my screen, we would have been coming down the canal where you could actually see portions of it visible on the surface. And then it gets to this part out here, which is a field, and we can kind of see this prominent black and white line running through my image. Are you able to see that?
Yeah, I am. It's very prominent.
And then once it gets down into this field area, you can just see that the water just kind of fans out naturally. So they channeled it, this was several miles of water that they were maneuvering and letting it fall in places and then rechannelizing it. And once they got it to this field, then they just sort of let gravity take hold and it fanned out and watered. They're probably maize fields, but maybe other beans and squash. I'm not quite sure.
Fascinating. Yeah, that's amazing. It's very clear. I can see exactly that line where you're talking about.
Yeah, they're pretty interesting. And so we went in and we looked at some of these lines in here to see if they looked like they were constructed or if they were naturally occurring. And we didn't see any more evidence of them constructing ditches or canals, smaller feeder ditches or anything like that from this region. And so this was one example of how we've used remote sensing and geophysics to document an ancient irrigation system.
That's fascinating. Now you're able to use this information, I guess, to go back and look for, if you're looking for anything else archaeological wise on these people.
Yeah, well, you would be able to. For myself, I'd be interested in this feature right here. And there's some up in here. Likely there's probably habitation sites, either short-term or possibly long-term village sites nearby. So this technology is certainly used in those kinds of studies as well.
So that's fascinating just to think about how long ago that was, and um, just like us, how they had to modify their water sources to survive.
Yeah, Utah is a challenging environment, right, to live in and make your living. And so to be farmers here, you're very much manipulating and managing that landscape.
That's fascinating.
So this fall, one of our biggest sort of pushes is to gather interview information from people, particularly in Cache Valley, about what water means to them. And we're looking for, we've already done some interviews, but we're looking for people who are interested in speaking to us about what water. So whether it's dams or canals, wells even, or just, your local creek means to you as a Cache Valley resident. We're also interested in talking to people who worked for some of these canal companies. And we'd like to hear that different perspective, if it's different. And then also farmers. Obviously we all have a great relationship or an interesting relationship with water. And so how does the farmer's relationship differ from the canal employees to sort of a community user? And so, as I mentioned, we've done some interviews this year already, but we're looking to do quite a few more this fall. And then eventually we are going to be recording oral histories about specific features, so specific canal systems. And those will be a little bit longer, of course, as oral histories are, and we'll be posting those eventually on our website. And so it's all sort of adding to this multidisciplinary, hopefully enriching perspective on what water heritage means to people living in northern Utah.
That's fascinating to think about. As you mentioned, going from, farmers to everyday users to maybe the canal builders. And maybe something you don't think about every day as an everyday community member. I know, I don't know that I've taken time to think of that, but, not only do I need water to survive, I enjoy it for recreation and all these things. That's fascinating. What kind of responses are you getting? What does water heritage mean to our community?
Well, so far, water is, of course, very important. And many people, when you do think about it, you think about how you need it on a daily basis, but also what it means on sort of a different level, like a non-necessity level. Sure, there's the aspect of you need it to brush your teeth or you need it to farm your crops, but also there's, walking along the canal with your family, or the first time you saw those ducks, or maybe going to the Stokes Nature Center and listening to music, or going to the preschool, or, whatever it is. So there's those aspects that we're really sort of able to sort of suss out in these interviews that you aren't able to if you're just talking about necessity, which is important too, especially being in the Mountain West. But that's what we're sort of trying to get at with this concept of water heritage.
Great. And when you're through with this project, will these oral histories and things be accessible to the public through the library or somewhere?
Yeah, do you want to go ahead, Molly?
Sure. Yes, right now we've got sort of a skeletal website as well as an archiving location, but we hope by the end of the 4 or 5 year project, we hope to have a digital archive available that's easy to use for the public, and also have all of this information for researchers as we continue to understand our connection to our landscapes and connection to water.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. I'm sure that will be a wonderful resource for just, many, many years to come. Now, tell us, what are some of the greatest changes, I guess, you've noticed from this project? So you're looking at water heritage, which is just a huge time span that humans have inhabited Utah and had to use water, maybe modify the landscape. to farm or whatever it is. I guess what are the greatest changes or surprises maybe you've noticed from this project over those years and years of time that you're studying?
I'm trying to think how best to approach this question. So there are, we're just sort of getting started with some of our interviews, but certainly what we're hearing in these initial interviews that we've conducted is that even in a person's lifetime, how we're managing and using water has changed.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be from in sort of from the perspective of a farmer and how they're using water. Certainly some of the same technologies are still used today. Gravity is still one of these great, it's sort of one of those tools that we have living on this earth that makes water accessible in difficult terrain. And so one of our informants, he spent time talking about that, how his pioneer forefathers, they designed their irrigation system using the topography and the landscape in that way to move water. And that's still part of what they're doing today. We also talked with a canal manager, and he talked about how some of these existing technologies in the past have needed to be modernized, and the reasons for that are not so much that those approaches weren't working, but that our demand and our use of that water has changed. And so that's caused these canal companies to really reconsider how they're moving water across our landscapes. So those are two examples that I can think of. Anna, do you have something to add, or?
Well, looking back in slightly further in time, during, as Molly mentioned, the Fremont are considered some of the first farmers in this region, and also their neighbors in the southeast, the ancestral Puebloans. And so you'd expect to start seeing some changes in irrigation and control over water from about 0 to 1300 or so, which is a huge time frame, and lots of things were different in different parts of Utah during that time period, with more intensity at different sites. But during the first 1300 years of the Common Era, you'd start to see many more activities for agriculture. And then after that, archaeologists and historians, of course, break centuries and time periods into different chunks. And we're kind of figuring out how to do that in terms of the historic period, in terms of when Europeans first arrived in Utah and its impacts in largely the 1800s. And so, of course, the pioneers in the mid-19th century made an impact. But there's lots of other waves of immigrants that came into the state, and different, there were different techniques of using water. And so we have our work cut out for us, particularly for the early 20th century, when you start to see a lot of activity in terms of ownership and land, farming plots, and then, of course, environmental changes in more recent years. And so these are all factors that are coming into play when you ask about what changes you might see in how people manage water.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, more recently, to me, it feels like, the past, 10, 20 years, we've really started to focus on the value of, the Logan River, for example, with the restoration project, and education-wise, being an educator, talking about, the importance of protecting our watersheds, preserving that clean water. So I imagine that this project is really going to emphasize the importance of kind of that conservation aspect in education as well. So if you had, I guess one thing that you'd want people to take away from this conversation today, what might it be?
Well, one thing I would like is to see people participate in our project because we really want to understand what that means, what water means to our community and what water heritage means to our community. Because we're hoping with these dollars to take that information and make it useful to our communities. So those might be building this archive, but it might be other things. So we need to hear what those might be. We're open to doing collaborative work with the community. And I guess that's kind of where I'm at. I want to really hear what our community wants to know and to share about water heritage.
Yeah, I mean, looking towards the future, with a growing population and growing resource needs, I mean, we're going to experience, I'm sure, more and more challenges related to the water supply. So I'm sure being able to hear from the community and what they need would be really helpful with this project. Is there a way that they can, what's the best way for them, I guess, to get in contact with you if they are interested in contributing to this project?
They can contact myself at molly.cannon@usu.edu. We have our website, which has a really long name, so perhaps we can just provide that at the end that you could link to.
At the bottom of our YouTube video with that website.
They can come to the Museum of Anthropology, and I'd be happy to talk with them there. And then Anna, can people contact you as well?
Yeah, you can contact me at anna.cohen@usu.edu.
Perfect. Well, I really enjoyed talking with you, Molly and Anna, and learning about this project. I had no idea, and I think I will go away thinking a little bit more about what water means to me and our water heritage. It's not something I think we consider a lot. There's so many different intangibles that we don't think about with water and why it's important to us. Like you said, it's not just about having water to brush your teeth or wash your dishes. There's so many more just invaluable ways that the water has meaning to us. Is there anything else that either of you have to share before we wrap up our canning conversation today?
Just thank you very much, Michelle, for including us in your talks. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. I will post those links in our YouTube video, guys, and we will be live in 2 more weeks. Well, not live, on YouTube in 2 more weeks with our next canning conversation, which will be about the bats with Val Grant. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. All right.
Able to see that? I can't remember.